All right. Blame versus cause. What's the difference? When you look at your life right now and you think about everything that's going good, going bad, how do you justify it? How do you kind of like quantify it and figure out why those things are the way they are? Why you feel the way you feel? How did you arrive at this point in your life? Do you blame? So do you look back in your life and you say, my parents messed me up, this relationship messed me up, this job messed me up, uh, or do you look at it as a causal factor? Do you look at it more uh, less emotionally, but try to like, oh well, let's find the root cause of the issue, something along those lines. Like a doctor would theoretically look at an illness versus, you don't blame cancer. It sucks
Yeah.
that cancer is going to kill you, but you a doctor is going to try to isolate and determine a cause to try to treat the cause. So it's something Eric brought up recently because just some of the issues that have, or not necessarily issues, but just life in general that's happened to us recently with a handful of friends that have gotten killed. We've had a few people that we've lost recently to tragic circumstances, and it was just a lot of heavy conversation between people and discussing all kinds of concepts like grief and guilt and religion and then this kind of narrowed down topic to blame or cause. So that's what we want to dive into and talk about today. And we're going to jump into our conversations faster this way so that hopefully you can kind of get yourself geared up mentally to participate in that and see what you think about what we have to say. So anyways, man, what do you when it comes to the blame or cause? I know that that was something that really resonated with you.
Yeah, it did, man. So I remember we were talking in the parking lot, dude, and I had a big thing growing up. First of all, I feel like I had a victim mentality growing up in the religion. And anytime like a problem would arise or uh, I'm just getting persecuted by the world, I'm just getting persecuted because, the boogeyman or the devil's out to get me and all these things. And so it's like, do I believe in evil spirits? Yes, I do. But do I feel like, can I put blame to that all the time? No. Can I put cause to that? Yes. Because if I continue to put blame to those things, then my growth would get hindered. And when I look back at how all this stuff came up, man, we were talking about, well, you brought it up, and you're like, well, you have a causation for something. We have to find the cause for it, and we have to fix it. We're taught this, right? We're taught this, hey, blame versus cause. But when you're going through very difficult times, um, I know me personally, man, I can look back and it's like I could look at Sable's suicide, I can look at the religion, I can look at my childhood, I could look, at not being able to be a fireman anymore, and I can blame those things, right? And be like, oh, poor me, I lost my job, or my wife committed suicide, or I grew up in a religious household that was just so jacked up, or whatever things I could look at to put the blame versus asking myself the correct questions. So if I ask myself, why do I feel this way? The causation, it's like, okay, well, I grew up this way. I'm not blaming the situation. I'm looking at that situation. I'm looking for the cause, and I'm coming to a solution. And that was hard. How basic that might sound, dude. Like for a very long time, I would put blame and cause in the same category. I didn't know how to separate those two. And I think me not knowing how to separate those two, dude, ended up me actually pitting myself more and victimizing myself more versus separating those two and being able to come up with a solution in my own personal life. On the job, that's a different thing. You run your calls, you do your thing, and you're kind of, you figure out how did the fire start or what's wrong with the patient. There's a causation on that, right? So we know how to fix it. But when it was my own personal life, I didn't know how to separate those two. If that makes any sense. And so like some of the conversations, man, that we've been having with so many different people these past few weeks. Uh, First of all, I'm grateful, for this podcast, how this started, and then people have been opening up to us, man, like super super fast, and they're just letting us know, like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and they've known us for a couple weeks, and it's like, oh my goodness, like that's cool. They feel that comfortable around us, right? But the more conversations we have, uh, I do hear uh, different perspectives and reasonings on different things, and some do put the blame, some don't put the blame. Some a lot go back to their childhood. Some go to their adulthood. And some of these conversations I've actually had, I'm like, okay, what's the cause and how can we fix it? You're not putting the blame game on anybody because you're not being a victim of that. It's what happened to you. So when you realize the situation for what it is, how can we fix it? Right. And yeah, it's that answers the question. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that it's, this is such a broad subject that there's not really a singular answer. Uh, and I think it's a concept you have to constantly like bat back and forth and play within your mind to really understand what it means. Because I think, if you break it down to when we're talking about cause, that's an easy way. I was very much that way for a long time about like, okay, root cause of this situation is what? Let's go back to that because if you can root it out, then that's how you really truly fix the problem. But the more that I've done the stuff in the last few years with you and all the people that we've engaged with, and the more that I've kind of started to open my mind into a concept of just not dwelling on that because the way I understand it is when we focus on causality, when we focus on what is the cause, that's called etiology. And the etiology or etiology, I'm not sure how you say it, but etiology is basically cause driven. So when we focus on causality, what we're actually doing is focusing on the past. And we talk a lot about the present. We talk a lot about, focusing on what we can control in the moment, like a stoic philosophy, um, and not living in the past kind of thing. I mean, you and I have discussed it on past episodes about the past and dwelling in the past being defined as depression.
Yeah.
Um, but if you think about it, so if etiology is the study of causality, and if causality is literally focusing on something in the past, like you're living in the past, you can't get over the past. And then what you're doing is you're identifying these things consistently in order to assign blame. And meanwhile, you're stuck in a negative feedback loop and you're never able to progress. You're never able to grow. You're never able to move forward because it's the constant looking over your shoulder as to how did I get here? Why am I here? Rather than like, who gives a shit how I got here? I'm here now. What do I have at my disposal to press forward and
Yeah.
do better? And if we can get out of that cycle of blaming and or causing, right? And just kind of like owning it ourselves and realizing what you truly do have control over, which is very little, and that's just your own actions and your own daily decisions. We can't control others. We can't I can't make you think a certain way. You can't make me think a certain way. You can be yourself and hope that your actions somehow impact me positively and then vice versa. But the more that I've done all this stuff and the more interactions I have with people, I think it's really important to understand the difference because I do think that there's value in studying history. I mean, they always say like history repeats itself because we don't learn. And if you look historically, that's the truth. Um, because we don't, because in a lifetime is so short in the span of time. 70, 80 years is nothing in the span of the world and time
Yeah.
itself. And so as generations go through cyclically and things change, you see things come back, you see things drop off. Um and so again, do we blame it, or do we figure out the cause of it? Well, then if we spend too much time lingering on the cause, then we're never learning and moving forward. So I'm not really sure what the balance is. I feel like it's a mistake to fully ignore the past, but that concept you and I've talked about recently about teleology is the opposite of that. It's actually a study of purpose, and it's a study of the future and being purpose driven, which you and I talk about is having a purpose, being purpose driven. Obviously, there's tons of books out there about purpose driven life, all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of interesting to look at from that perspective is like, are those two connected? Are they mutually exclusive? Can one exist without the other? I don't really know. I still grapple with that because, like, again, I'm very much like, no, I think you learn from the past. You apply it to now in order to improve your future.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we need to, what's that old saying, man? It's like if you're constantly looking in the rearview mirror, right? You can't see what's in front of you, right? So it's just a basic concept. It's like you look forward because that's where you want to go. If you're constantly looking backwards, you're not going to make any growth, or it's going to be worse. You're either going to die or you're not going to make any progress at all, right? Like you're just going to, you're not paying attention to what's in front of you. And so it goes back to the purpose. But like with cause, what it brought to me, man, is it actually took this huge weight off my shoulders of like, I'm not putting blame. I'm looking at the past, because if I don't look at the past, then it's like, how do I know if I'm growing? Right. I looked back at my journaling the past few years, right? We had a podcast on that. It's like, that was my past. I looked back at that and I'm like, wow, that was my mindset back then. Holy crap. That's insane. Right. So it's like, but I looked at my past with intent. I looked at my past to see like how much have I grown. I wasn't looking at my past to blame my past. I was looking at my past to be like, wow, okay, this is why this happened. These are the things I've done to grow. So I used the past for a good, cause to grow for the future, right? And these are things I've learned, man, in the past few years with all the healing I've done, with the SGB shot, with the different doctors we're talking, with the partnerships we have, different people we've been helping. And when we're helping, our friends or people we don't even know, they're helping me so much because I'm hearing these conversations and I'm like, wow, like I remember how I was a few years ago. There's a past again, but it's like I'm not looking at it to blame or belittle myself. It's like, no, man, you have grown because your past has changed you in a good way because you've grown from it. Now you're able to help other people in a whole different level that I could have never helped if I didn't go through what I went through, right? And so as they're telling me their stories, I think I told you this the other day. Somebody else was telling me their story, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm seeing myself in their story, and I'm able to like listen to them, and I'm like, man, when they got the SGB shot, I was just like that. It was like you told me the same thing. You're like, oh, you're on fire, dude. Like I'm having all these aha moments of like, oh man, I feel better, or dude, this happened, or that happened, or whatnot. And we get some of those text messages from people we know, and some people we don't know email us, and we're seeing the same kind of I don't want to call it a miracle, man, but some people are saying it's a miracle to them. They're just like, this shot has like changed my life. Like I got my life back, right? So call it a miracle, call it whatever you want. Your body's just getting what it needs. It's like if you're thirsty, you're not going to drink a ton of soda. You're going to go and drink water. It's going to quench your thirst, right? So it's like with the shot and with the past and where did the cause come from? I feel like it's very crucial to look at the past with intent. If you're looking at it to just put blame, right, and just be like, oh, I'm this way because this is what happened to me. Now you're in a victim's mentality, right? Maybe that might happen for a little bit. I would guard highly against that because I did do that for a little while, right? And then you get stuck and it's not good. And it's very unhealthy, right? If that's part of your journey, like everybody's journey is different, but I really try to look at my life and have intent with my thinking of why am I thinking this way. If I look back at look at the fire department, dude. We have the after action reports, right? So that's the past. That's an incident that happened, right? So it's like, how many times do we have these reports? Oh, you guys all did great. It's like, no, you didn't. Like this didn't get done right. Maybe this didn't get done right. Some things were good, but sometimes people were afraid to actually get positive criticism, right? So criticizing yourself is very difficult. So when I look at the past or the cause, it's like, no, I have to realize I'm going to be critical with myself in a good way because this is going to help me grow. Not babying myself, not lying to myself, but telling myself the truth so I could use it for further growth in the future versus looking in the past and just saying, well, it is what it is. That's just well, life gave me. No, it's bullcrap. No, like you can come up with some kind of solution to become better, right? And I was talking to someone else the other day as well, and they were like, I wish I can just bag up resilience and just give it to people. And my response was like, some people just, I feel like we are all created with resilience, but some of us don't know how to find that because so many are just surviving, and to them that can be resilient. But it's like looking at a negative situation or big challenges in your life and actually turning as much of that as you can into a positive. And me, like for a very long time, I felt like I was kind of resilient. It wasn't until these past few years with talking to you and going through all these different modalities that I've grown to have a resilient mindset. I've used the past to be resilient. I've used my old personality, I feel like, of like kind of blaming things in my childhood to be resilient. I've had to really switch all those things to to move forward. And that's hard, dude. That is hard because like your brain is is always trying to get you back into how you used to think, what you used to do, who you used to hang out with, all those kinds of things. So when you start to switch your thinking and try to like hijack your brain to do new things, it's very hard. It is very, very difficult because it's a daily battle, man. It's a daily battle to be able to do that, because if you don't control your thoughts in your brain, that the brain will just, it'll overtake you. And it overtook me for a while. But once you finally get it back, it feels pretty damn good.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, you said a lot of good stuff there that, I think one of the biggest things I've seen and just through conversation with you and everything that's happened is I think the like one of the key concepts is like your past doesn't determine your future. Like what's happened to you does not dictate what happens from this point forward. You do. You're the one that has to choose the things you do daily. And that's where like you consistently show the discipline. And I mean, um, like I told you before, I think I've said it in prior episodes, I know. Like you have the total excuse that you could use about your wife's suicide, and you could just be a drunk, you could be a piece of shit, you could be a victim mentality every single day, and rightfully so. Most people say, "Oh yeah, man, this poor guy, look what he's been through," right?
Yeah.
But you refuse to do that. So, and it's a good thing because I like the concept that um if you really look at like why is it that you need someone to blame, right? As a person, why do we feel the need to assign responsibility? Because I like the idea of the causality. Like I like the idea of understanding why, but just not overly focusing on it. I think once you understand why, like now it's like, okay, now you know. Now you shouldn't have to sit there and focus. It's kind of there's a quote that says, a mistake made more than once is a choice. And I like that because it's like, yeah, no, you can screw up, but when you consistently do it, now it's not a mistake, it's a choice. And then you just, that's how I was raised, or hey, this happened to me. That's why I do this. That's why I drink so much because I got beat up as a kid, or my wife killed herself, or whatever type trauma you have had. So I kind of look at it like, yeah, once you've determined the cause of something, or you've kind of like pinpointed, like what kind of in our discussions at times, it's like now it's a choice, man. you you've you've kind of traced it back. You understand it now. Now it's up to you, and that's the hard part. Because now there's no longer anyone to blame but yourself because you have the information. So a lot of people don't want that because they want to still have that ace card to pull. Like, look at this. No, it's not my fault that I'm an asshole. It's not my fault that I cheated, or I drank too much, or I do drugs, or I'm sick all the time, or I don't go to work, or I'm this, or I'm and pick your whatever. But I think it's an interesting way to look at it is that if you're really honest about why we do a lot of the things we do, a lot of times it's to protect ourselves from being hurt. You said that in the past on the podcast, talking about just like brain function and how it's designed to keep us alive, designed to keep us survive, keep us from feeling pain. And so I like the idea behind that, the causality, understanding it, but then just moving on from it, and then realizing from like this moment forward, it's your choices. And really, the echo chambers that we live in right now, a good example in society, take it away from the emotional side that we're talking about, like the trauma and things like that, but take it on a more broader scale, with recent events in LA, the big fires, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's unprecedented, and it's this and it's that." And it's like, really? Because I remember in 2017 and 18 when we were down there at the Thomas Fire and it blew through Ventura and Santa Barbara and Montecito, and that was unprecedented. And then there was mudslides that killed people, and it's like the same thing every season. I feel like we get these. I mean, we had 500,000 acre fires last summer. This was a total of 40 or 50,000 acres. Obviously, horrible devastation. It's not trying to take anything away from what the people that went through the fires had to live through, obviously. But what's the immediate aftermath? Who's to blame? Whose fault is it? Oh, it's the
Exactly.
government. It's Newsom. It's this. It's that. Now, whether and I don't care, like where you land on the spectrum of blaming. If you talk to people that were there, friends of ours that responded to the fire, it was 80 and 100-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, if you've ever been in, most of you, us, I mean, I've been in some significant winds, but never, yeah, I've never even been in 100-mile-an-hour winds and all the years at sea and stuff like that. Like that is just, you can't even fathom. You would call them biblical winds, I think, right?
I
Uh,
don't
uh,
know how to call them biblical, but dude, I just had that conversation, dude, with some friends yesterday. I'm like, I've been on some pretty big fires, and the same thing you said. I'm like, oh, unprecedented, really? I'm like, oh, I can look back on my career and be like, no, there were some big ones, and yeah, maybe in LA that's a different thing, right, and whatnot. But yeah, with those wins, like you just said, it's like I've been on some pretty big fires, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever been on anything with 100-mile-per-hour winds or
no,
biblical winds. I mean,
no.
60, 70, 80, but yeah, extra 20 mph on that bad boy, like, like that's
Well, that,
significant,
and that's the point right there, is that 20 miles an hour is what you normally feel when you're like, oh my gosh, it's really windy outside. That's like a 20-mile-an-hour breeze. That's a pretty stiff breeze. Um, so you're adding 20 on top of 80 already. It's an order of magnitude that grows. It's an incredible amount of force and power and energy that nature. It's like there's no plane, helicopter, army of firefighters that would stop that. The creek fire up here in the valley, it ran like crazy. It tore up trees that had 14-foot diameters. I mean, it was unbelievable what it did with that. And so even the damage itself in the Palisades and all that, when you look at the Great Chicago Fire, that burned down the entire city of Chicago, San Francisco when the earthquake happened, Long Beach when the 1933 earthquake happened. I mean, there's all these things you can look at in history that fire is a devastating force, So, but again, when we go back to blame and cause, that's an interesting concept, because does it mean that it was just there was nothing that could have prevented what happened that night? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, rather than in the aftermath of something, us all jumping on a bandwagon of like, let's point a finger, having a more nuanced ability to step back and realize that there were factors there that exacerbated what probably wouldn't have been a big deal.
yeah,
you know I mean, maybe they find out when this thing's all said and done that it was an arson set in a perfect position in a perfect place with that wind in alignment with the right topography by somebody that knew what they were doing. I mean, so then it's like, well, is that, again, let's go back, is that a government problem? Would it have changed if we had this excellent you know forestry process or policy that they go in, they thin it? I don't know, and I'm not even going to speculate. Like, I mean, I know what I'm doing in the fire service, but I don't. I mean, this stuff to me is just like, there's so many variables that it's like you can't possibly know. So it's just like that. Unfortunately, that night you had a bad hand with the weather, and so in the aftermath, it's like, is there a blame? Is there a cause? I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I waffle with that stuff. So that's why I kind of like the idea of uh not letting the past determine the future, kind of thing. It's like, so we should learn from that, and then we should gain those lessons and then move forward, not just look for a way to assign blame so that, we can kind of shove off the responsibility on someone else.
that's the key point, dude. What you just said, it's like I feel like the difference between blame and cause. Um, dude, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a doctor. We're just two dudes talking about this stuff, right? Of like our own personal experiences of like actually living through these things. But like, I feel like with the blame, first of all, you're not gonna take personal accountability for it, right? And so with cause, I feel like you are. But like with what you just said, dude, as far as the first thing that the news or politics, whatever, right? Oh, it's the Republicans, or it's this side, or it's this or that, or it's whatever. They're going to put blame, right? And I get it; it's a political move, and whatever they got to do. But now, if we are fed those things in life, on social media, on the news, blame, 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 right? Now that gets into your psyche as a person on your personal life, I feel like, because you're used to seeing these things. And then now you're putting blame on things without even really realizing you're not trying to find the cause, you're just blaming. And I feel like it's easy to get stuck in that, right? Like in this world of noise, right? And you just jump on the bandwagon because that's easy to do, right? Versus taking accountability for yourself, for your family, and saying, okay, here's the root of the issue. Let's see what we can do to fix it. And now let's have a plan forward and let's accept it and move on. And for me, though, man, I struggled for a very long time with even realizing what is the cause. I didn't know where the cause was. So I felt like, okay, well, I can blame this, but what else do I have? I don't is the childhood the problem? Is the work the problem? Is the suicide the problem? Is am I the problem? Is my thinking the problem? Is where's the cause, right? So like you're having to sift and shift through all these things to figure the cause out. And that's difficult because there may not be one cause. There can be numerous causes, right? So it's like you're not putting blame on things, but you're looking for the causation of things. That one cause can go down a rabbit hole of like, this just opened another can of worms of things that caused this. Okay, well, let's work on that. Then once you work on that, then it gets your thinking, and hopefully, well, what it did for me is it got my thinking more in line. Once I found the cause for things, I fixed that. Then it was like, well, crap, now I got to work on this because there's another cause of why I was thinking that way. And so I feel like you use the term like waffling back and forth or ping ponging back and forth, but it's like sometimes you're trying to find what the cause is, and figuring that out with all the stuff that's going on, with how busy we are as people, can be difficult. And then I think sometimes what happens is you just some people just sometimes give up and they just kind of let it be what it is and don't really truly work on what needs to be worked on because they can't figure it out because it's too hard. Or once they do figure out the cause, then they realize there's a lot of work to be done. And that's hard to do, to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, well, I got to work on this. So then it goes to the blame game and now you're going to start pointing fingers, right? But yeah, I know for me, man, it was really hard. I didn't have just one cause, right? So when you're going through these different causes, you just have to chip away. You just chip away at it, man, and fix one and fix the other one and keep cruising. And uh, you learn more about yourself, you learn more about others, and different conversations we have. Blame versus cause, right? Hence this podcast. Like we just talked about this 2-3 weeks ago, and it was an aha moment for me of like, I needed to hear that. you know, like, okay, that maybe I wasn't ready, or my brain wasn't gonna understand that a year ago or whatever, but it did now. So it is what it is. But it was like a moment in my life of like, holy crap, you're not blaming the past. You have done the right stuff, man. No, you have found the root problems of things. That's why it's taken so long, because anything worth keeping, anything that is of value, rarely does it ever happen overnight. It takes time. It takes hard work. It takes relentlessness, right? It takes, we talk about with Doc Springer, the warrior mindset, right? And you have to be resilient, right? And I feel like we talk about resiliency, we talk about these things a lot, but it's a lot of work to have that daily mindset to be like, how can I be better today? What can I do for, how am I going to put myself first? And this is something that you told me, man. This was probably like a year ago, dude. They're like, Eric, you're gonna have to be selfish for a little bit. I don't know if you remember telling me that. And
Yep.
growing up a Jehovah's Witness, growing up in the religion, that's like that's not what you do, right? So I've learned these things, over the past few years. But once again, when you said that, I'm like, he's completely right. And different people we work with or whatnot, and I work with, I hear that same thing over and over again. It's like, okay, you're finding the cause again. It's like, if you're not being selfish with your time, with the things that make you better, then the world's not getting the best version of yourself. So once again, it goes back to, what's the cause? What's going on? Why are you acting a certain way? And then you figure out what it is and you change it. And I think when you put yourself number one, that was hard for me to figure out, was to put myself number one. Um, and I think to many people, that can come off very selfish. And I thought it was selfish. I thought it was selfish for putting myself number one. And the more healing that I did and understood that concept, because that's the most selfless thing you could do for yourself and for others. Hence this podcast, hence the people we're helping, right? If I didn't do those things, if you didn't do those things, I wouldn't have this capability to help, because it would constantly be just trying to fix everybody else but myself. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I think that that's an important takeaway is that, I remember saying that to you because I knew it's what you needed to hear in that moment. But the truth is, it's not being selfish.
Mm-mm.
It's what it is. It's doing the right thing, because you can only control what you do. And you are actually like not being effective or the best version of yourself because you were so wrapped up in the judgment of others and so wrapped up with like, well, I have to do things this certain way because so and so might look at it like this, or this person might say that, or the church might or whatever those things that go through your mind are. And so just saying it to you in that way was to try to like rattle you into like, dude, it's okay to follow what your internal voice is telling you to do. It's like you can see as a friend on the outside, seeing you struggle with like what you're actually doing versus what you seem like you really want to do. And that's the thing. It's like, well, if you have this voice that's telling you to do something, whether that you believe that's God or you believe that's just some internal compass or whatever you want to call it, um, a lot of times following that is important because that is being true to yourself. And a lot of times our subconscious knows what we need. It drives, your thoughts become reality, the whole Joe Dispenza thing. And it's very true, because when you hyper focus on stuff, especially when you're constantly letting it take up a lot of real estate in your head, you all of a sudden find yourself at those crossroads. So the causation or the causality part of it, um I think it's critical for success, especially when you compare it to things like engineering or law, let's say, because getting to the cause of a problem is how you resolve an issue and you prevent the recurrence of it. But then you move on, and then it's like, cool, hey, we learned that lesson, we avoid that pitfall in the past. Like right now, uh, something simple would be an example of like DUI. Okay, my DUI was caused by getting drunk. It wasn't caused by my dad and my genetic alcoholism and my the trauma that I've seen on the job. The cause was because I got hammered at a bar and got in my car and drove, and I shouldn't have, right? So how do I fix that? I don't drink. Seems really simple, but that's the truth. Because when you break away the emotion from it and the need for me to feel like I have to assign blame to a decision I made, right? Right or wrong. Uh, if you think about blame in terms of like social and interpersonal context, the focus becomes the accountability. The focus becomes having a target. Somebody has to be held accountable for the action. And it always feels better to shift the target to somebody else and be like, well, it wasn't, I got drunk that night because my wife and I were on the rocks. And you know what? If she would have been better, then I wouldn't even have been there. I wouldn't have been out drinking that night. I mean, that was easy for me. I actually felt that way. There were many, many times that I would get frustrated as I was working through my process and be like, you know what? No, this isn't my fault. This is and I would go through this battle internally. So, it's easy to say the stuff. It's hard to put it into practice, but I think when it comes down to it, by telling you that be selfish was the just kind of trying to get you to realize that You are the only one responsible for you. You're the only one that knows what that voice is telling you in your head. You need to stop worrying about the judgments of others and things like that. And then I think that I saw the light come on for you, and you know, and it's I came to that on my own too when I was traveling around the world and realized, because like obviously when I made the decision I made was about what I wanted to do. That's why I was single for my whole life. You got married at a young age. I stayed single my whole young adult life for a reason, because I understood that I wasn't ready to compromise what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was priority. What my desires were going to take precedence over anybody else. I was like, no, dude, I don't want to compromise. I don't want to live with somebody and share the money I make. I'm like, I'm gonna do it how I want. And I feel like that was a good way to live as a young guy that understood myself. That dude, I was in no place maturity wise to compromise with another human being. I mean, I tried to be a good friend, a good uncle, a good buddy, things like that. But like, be a husband, you're out of your mind. I wasn't ready for that. So,
uh, that's true, dude. So there's something you said, man, that I think it's a great Stoic philosophy, and we talk about it a lot. But you said something. You're like, hey, once we cut the emotion out of it, we have to make a decision. Um, that's not saying that took me a while to wrap my head around, right? Because um, everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to feel validated to a certain degree, right? Um, but when things get challenging in life, we can get very emotional, right? You can look at the DUI, right? Like you said, you could have blamed it, oh, my wife this or the job this, right? Because you're emotional, you're tired, you're making a decision off of emotion. So it's like it's a very hard concept to come to grips with, to make the decision. And I know Stoicism talks about that a lot, but like I think that's a cool topic to talk about for a bit, because that is a cause. Being emotional is a cause, right? And when you start putting blame to something, oh, I'm just an emotional person because it's the trauma or whatever it might be. But it's like, what are some things you've done, dude, in the past, you know, in your lifetime of like learning how to like cut emotion out, to not to have any emotion, because you're very empathetic, for sure. But how do you balance that? When it comes to like decisions and okay, I'm gonna let the emotion go and do what I need to do, because that's difficult, man. You talk to people, you see people in a group, and they're not liked. If they're judged, they don't like me, and it's kind of like it's kind of difficult. So, how would we cut the emotion out? I know Jocko talks about this a lot. Is taking the emotion out, but yeah, just kind of what do you think about that?
well, I think it's situational is, I guess, the best way I would say it, because I think that emotion is important in making many decisions that we are faced with probably on a daily basis. Um, and then there's other times it's not. So, as an example, if you make $2,000 a month and your rent is $1,000 and your car payment's 200 and insurance and gas and all these other things is another couple $100, and at the end of the month you're left with $200 to spend on whatever you want, and you are a Starbucks person, you like your $5 coffee every morning. Okay, good on you. That's $150 a month. At $5 a day across 30 days, you're paying $150 for Starbucks coffee, which leaves you $50 left over to spend on whatever else you need. That's not a lot of money in today's world to spend on entertainment and things that are nice to have or want to have kind of stuff. Um, so I don't know if that's a great example, but like you better look at that unemotionally, because if you are like, no, you know what, I deserve whatever I want. I'm living my life. I'm gonna go to this store and buy the shirt I want, or I'm gonna get those new AirPods or the new iPhone, or upgrade because Bob down the street has the cool rims and I'm gonna do that on my car. Whatever. I mean, pick your thing that you got to keep up with the Jones. Like, to me, you better have a very unemotional viewpoint when it comes to like your finances, you know? So that's, to me, that's very easy, because a dollar is a dollar. Like when I look at a mathematical equation, if I'm bringing in this much money and you want to spend this much money and it's more than I'm bringing in, well, the math doesn't add up. So I better either get my ass to work and do some more, do an
Yeah,
overtime, sell something. I mean, something's got to give, right? And so how do you get there? Well, I mean, to me, it's a reality based approach to things where it's like, I understand that. I mean, I grew up poor too, like you said. My mom, I remember real specifically things like I always tell the story about my mom would rent a VCR. We would go to the old, it was called the warehouse, right? And I don't know if, yeah, I think you're probably of the same era, right? That it was pre-Blockbuster, put it that way. There was a store you would rent VCR tapes, so the VHS tapes, and we didn't own a VCR. My mother had to rent it, and she could only afford to rent one once a month. And who knows what it cost back then? It was probably $20, which in the '80s was a decent amount of money. And so she would rent a VCR for $20, and then my sister and I were allowed to rent one movie. And I remember resenting that stuff as a kid because all my friends had all that, they had everything and whatever. My dad actually was, like I told you before, he was a Disneyland dad, so he had a lot more money. But I tell that story because when I was an adult now, it's helped me with my own personal budget. Like I splurge all the time for my wife and I. I don't mind, but I'm making decent money. Things are going well. I've made some smart moves to where I'm able to have, what you call disposable income. Um, so that's an example in my mind that just automatically jumps up when you ask me how do you do that. It's like, so look at it from that's kind of hard to argue, right? Is that if you are spending more money than you're making, that's a problem. So now you take that same framework and you apply it to your personal life, and you start thinking about things like we've talked about, where there's a point in your life where maybe you're with the wrong person, and you can try all you want. You can go to the pastor, you can go to the psychologist, you can go to the Tony Robbins retreat. You can try everything you want, and maybe it gets better for a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're trying to jam the square peg into the round hole, and it's just never going to work. So at what point do you cut the emotion out? Look at some of the causality, recognize, dude, we're oil and water. We're never going to mix. And it's like, hey, does that mean we have to hate each other, or can we high five and go our separate ways and just be like, hey, we gave it a shot. It didn't work. Chalk up what you learned, move on with your life. Obviously, that's so easy to say and really, really difficult to put into practice. But to me, it's the same sort of approach to it. And it goes back to when it blame versus cause. I think that we in the fire service, it depends on how you develop this, but personally, what I did early on in my career, I had a salty old engineer who told me, he said, kid, when you roll in, the first thing you do is determine, is this an emergency or non-emergency? And he says, and what I mean by that is, he goes, you're going to run lots of calls, so you're going to learn the difference between what is a true emergency, which means that if I don't do something right this moment, the situation is going to get drastically worse, and someone's either going to get hurt or killed, like right now. And he said, and then there's non-emergency, which is just like the person that called thinks it's an emergency, but it's not. Like we can just kind of calm everybody down. Again, get rid of the emotion, bring the emotion back down to a level-headed, rational thought process so we can just, hey, let's just solve the problem. So I just took that same concept and applied it to my personal life, um, of like when I felt the emotions rising, when I felt myself getting overly committed to something, or like I'm gonna get super passionate about something. It's like knowing that that's probably not going to lead to a good, intelligent decision, like in the long run. I mean, I've sucked at it plenty of times. So don't get me wrong. It's not like I've done it right every time. But it's like when you go to a call and you see something that just your emotional brain can't wrap your head around. I remember cutting a married couple out of a car one time that they had literally just gotten married that night. So I don't remember, it was 11 o'clock at night, midnight. Their wedding had just happened, so they've been married for a few hours, right? And the guy was crushed by the steering wheel, and his new bride, she's in the passenger, and she's in her wedding dress still, blood everywhere, and she's passed out. But we got to get her out. She's pinned, and you know the deal. We got to make the cut, and we got to press the dash off the guy using the ram. But we're all looking at each other like, as soon as the steering wheel comes off this guy, he's dead, because that's what's
Yeah.
holding them together. We knew
Yeah.
it. You seen it, and I just remember explaining that to him, like, dude, if we don't do this, like her time is running out. We got to get her going. And he was like, get her out of here. And I was like, okay. I was like, you understand that there's nothing we can do for you. He's like, yep. He's like, and he just like looked at her, the whole time that we were separating the dash, and then he was gone quick. And I mean, obviously in that moment it was heavy, but I mean, how do you fall apart? You start crying? Do you start hugging the guy, or do you pull the dash off of him to get her? That's the Jocko thing of like, you have to, in those moments, be ice cold. and do the job per se. But on the flip side, if you apply that to your personal life, a lot of times it's helpful because so often we are emotionally attached to something in our lives that is actually uh, counteracting, or it's a contraindication to getting us to where we want to be. So I don't know, I kind of talked in circles there, but just to your question, yeah, that's some of the ways that I look at it personally is just taking, when I get to a call, I didn't cause this problem. I'm highly trained to try to offer a solution. So if you can kind of look at that in your own personal life, oftentimes things that happen around you, you didn't cause it. You're not, and it's not that there. It's not important to find a person to blame. Just apply what you understand about your own con what the things that you can control, apply what you understand about that so that to best resolve the problem in that moment. And if you do that, more often than not, you're going to come to the correct decision.
Yeah. No, you said a lot of stuff there, man. But like that call, yeah, we've I think anyone listening to this has definitely had those calls where you're using the you're cutting them out, using the jaws, and you just know you're like, yeah, the second this pressure's released, within seconds they're done, right? But that could go back to cause. That could go back to how we how do we interact emotionally with others. And I know for me, for a very long time, we've talked about this before in many podcasts, but uh, you can look at alcoholism. You could look at, you just brought it up. It's like, hey, we're oil and water. We're never going to work out, right? Where's that? Why? Are we not working on ourselves enough? Are we blaming the other person? Right? Are we afraid to take accountability for it? Is it the job? You're not putting blame on the job, because how many times do we run those calls and our emotional state, we become numb to a lot of things because all the stuff we see, right? So it's like when you're trying to find the root cause of a problem, right? That can be very difficult. And so maybe you are oil and water, okay? And you have to go your separate ways. Maybe you're not. Maybe it's you're just so emotionally numb because of the job, right? That you just can't have a connection anymore, but you're going to say we're just freaking not meant to be together. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's kind of a blame thing, maybe it's not, I don't know. But that's up to each and every one of us to find a solution for that situation. And I know that's how I used to be. And I can look at my prior marriage and I can be like, gosh, I look at the religion and I look at, like, just this mindset perspectives. I look at the job and I look at the calls and a busy department and, just all these different things, we'd see on the job. And, I would sometimes, I just, it's because I had a crappy night last night. I'm just going to be short with you today. I wouldn't really be super like mean or pissy or whatever. I'd just be just let me be, right? And then if she didn't say the right thing or if the house wasn't the right way, then I would kind of get upset. But I would find myself blaming other things, like it's because I didn't get sleep, or it's because this kid died on me, or this accident that happened and the call went crappy or whatever. It's like I would find myself blaming those things versus saying, hey, like, I had a bad night, I need some time. Like, I chose this job. This is what I've taken on. I've loved doing it, but it's like, give me some time, because I don't want to piss you off. I don't want to say something bad to demean you or to make you feel lesser. I need to figure my stuff out. It was a rough night. So I'm finding the cause of why I'm acting a certain way, communicating that, and just give me some time. And hopefully, if the other person understands, they may not. They may say, screw you. Like, they might be pissed, right, for whatever things. But hopefully, that communication, finding the cause, can then help that situation, right? And I know with myself, with just life, sometimes it was easy for me to just, okay, well, I'm going to go out with the boys tonight because it was busy at work, or my marriage is shitty, or she just doesn't understand me, or she doesn't support me in the fire service. So I would kind of put these blames to things, and then I would start making decisions based on, like you said earlier, because of this or because of that, versus taking accountability for it and being like, no, I need to find the root cause of this and make a plan. And
So
as
that's
far as
good. I
the
mean, we talked about that before because I did the same thing with Mari. And I mean, so obviously what I said before is not something I was always putting into practice well. Um, I would come home the same way and get pissed off instantly when the house was dirty or whatever. I didn't care what her days were like off because no matter what, they weren't as bad as mine. And that was one of those bullshit mentalities that we have that is a it has to do with the sympathetic system. We talked about that on multiple episodes. So here's a good example of what we're talking about. So causality, the cause of, me coming home was getting my ass kicked at work for X amount of days, seeing all this tragedy. My brain's overloaded. I'm in the fight or flight, ready to throw down. I'm hyper vigilant. I just want to come home to my sanctuary to kind of try to come down and relax and get some rest. And then to come in and feel threatened in my own home, and that's the crazy part is that our brain perceives those things. It took me having to get educated on that. Now, I understand it. Now, if I do it again, I'm an asshole. It's that simple. There's no more like, no, 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 but she should have done this. No, it's like now you understand the cause. Like you don't get to use that as an excuse anymore. And that's really what it comes down to. Because blame is about, again, finding a target to be able to put on someone else and be like, no, it's her fault for not cleaning the house. She should know that when I come home, everything should be dialed in, no matter what. No excuses, because no matter what, my night is worse than hers. If that's the mentality you choose to have, then you're not being realistic with yourself and you're not being honest because it's not the truth. The truth is that we're all human beings and that you don't know why XYZ didn't get done, but you have control over your own emotions. You have control over your own reactions to things. And once you understand that you're prone to certain things, that's when you have to take responsibility. Go back to the drinking thing. Why do I not drink right now? I'm not going to meetings. I'm not calling sponsors or anything like that. Like I don't even worry about it. Does that mean that I'm unrealistic that that monster could come back? No, no, I totally understand that addiction's a real thing. Uh, However, I have deeply assigned, you know, causality to what my relationship with alcohol results in, I guess is the best way to say. And it's just nothing good. There's nothing good that results from it. I love a good glass of red wine, a good glass of whiskey, a great beer. All that stuff's awesome. I mean, I still see stuff and think like, oh yeah, I remember that one. That was good, whatever. But my brain immediately is like, yeah, however, you plus that equals bad. So do I even need one? No, but it's a responsibility that you have to like just your example of Jocko, it's an extreme ownership thing. Like, are you willing to actually be extreme in your ownership, or do you have to constantly share the blame? Right? Do I have to be like, well, I could have one, but I don't know that I can trust my wife to not piss me off, or I could have one, but because I'm genetically disposed to that, I can't. I have to have some way to like not make it 100% my fault.
Yeah.
Because it's just too hard sometimes to take the weight of the responsibility on yourself. So it's kind of like with you, like you had your religious upbringing. You could fall back into that all the time if you want to, and it's like, or you can be like, no, now I understand it. I'm a fucking adult. I'm going to move on with my life, and I'm going to take all the good stuff that I grew up with, hold on to that, set all the other stuff down, and move forward with my life and focus on that purpose on the future. Have that teleology instead of the etiology.
Yeah. And so, and it's, yeah, everything you said. And that's kind of when it goes back to my question about like the emotion, take the emotion out of it. That's kind of, I think, what we're talking about here. It's like we get emotional. We come home, we're emotional, we're pissed, we're tired, right? Rightfully so. We should be. We've, been running calls. We've been, mentally fatigued in different ways. So, it's very difficult to take that emotion out, right? Like you just talked about, and take that personal accountability and then act in. I mean, I just feel like you just have to act in a good, just a freaking good, manly way, man. And it's like just a way that your wife, your family, your friends are going to respect you. And first of all, you got to respect yourself. And I think taking the emotion out is very difficult, but when you do that and you look at the causality of stuff, without the emotional side of it, which is very difficult, I think a lot of us can come up to a lot better decisions, if we're able to do that, because we are typically less emotional when we've got what we want. We've got everything's going good, right? We're doing pretty good, but we can get emotional when you have a lack of sleep. You haven't had that good hot meal. You've been working for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, 14 days, 21 days on a strike team, whatever. But that doesn't mean we just have a freaking green light to do whatever the hell we want to do, right? We still have to take accountability, take the emotion out of it, and be like, hey, we chose this job, we chose this life, we chose whatever it was, and let's move forward from here. So, no, that's kind of what I want to talk about, man. With taking the emotion out, it's very difficult, and I know for me, taking the emotion out was hard because growing up with, I feel like there's a lot of things lacking in my childhood, so I was very emotional. So my body would tend to go to the emotional side, the more like somebody told me, it was years ago. They're like, "You're so emo." I didn't even know what emo meant, dude. See, when they told me that, I didn't know what that meant. I'm like,
Yeah.
emo? I'm like, what the frick does emo mean? I'm like, I didn't know what that meant. I'm like, oh, I'm emotional. And I kind of like took offense, but I'm like, what the hell? And I thought about it. I'm like, no, I am. But
Yeah.
why am I this way? Why? Because I was lacking things. There was natural things that made me emotional, right? I wasn't putting blame. I'm emotional because of this. It's like, but why? I've always asked myself why, why. Once I can come up with like an answer to that, it's like, oh, no, they're right. Man, that's kind of like, that's embarrassing. I didn't even know I was like that, right? And later in life I learned these things, I'm just like, oh my gosh, dude, yeah, you were like pretty emo, man. Like, but I didn't even know, dude. Like, that sounds stupid, but when you are in that world and you are in a lack and constantly living in lack, was just living my life thinking it was normal. And when I found the cause of some of these issues and the lack of love or the lack of communication, lack of whatever, I was able to then start, uh, chiseling away at these things and not be called emo anymore, man. So it's good.
That's awesome, dude.
But
Well, I would
anyways, it's
say it's
pretty
the same thing
funny,
I
man.
told you the story
Yeah,
on the podcast when they said that I was an empath, and I was like, "What the hell is that?" But it's true, and I think that it's a good thing to be emotional. I think it's a good thing that because that word has a negative connotation to it, but it's not if you think about it. I mean, being a loving, you and I were just talking about that before we started the podcast. Being a loving person is important. Um, but it's hard. I mean, the fire service, that's something you can't do every day. I mean, because you have to be able to drop the emotion and do a job, be a machine, be a soldier, whatever you want to call it. But that goes back to like how I never learned to walk in two worlds, to do the two different things while leave the boots at the station, come home, be a human being, right? And understanding that it's the same thing I think the soldiers go through when they get back from like war, is understanding that, okay, hey, that was the battlefield out there, in here you have to be different. And uh, a big jump for anybody, to have to do that. So I think ultimately, when it comes to the cause and the blame thing, it just blame's the easy way out. Blame is the society we're in right now.
yeah,
Then we turn on the TV and that's all you hear. Look at social media, that's all you see. I mean, we've always got to have an excuse. We've always got to have a reason. The mentality is just so rampant. Um, I think I've talked about it before, but I love Gad Saad, who wrote the his concepts of the idea of pathogens, mind pathogens that create like a mind virus that everybody, the ideologies that permeate things. Um, he's got a bunch of great books. I just heard him recently. He did another episode with Joe Rogan. He's been on him like a dozen times, and he's just hysterical because he's an awesome. He's an evolutionary psychologist that focuses on like behavior, and I believe that's correct. But point being, he's a brilliant dude, and a lot of his stuff is about the mind viruses that are out there because the group thinks so easy, and you get infected with ideas that you're able to grab onto and then assign blame to excuse you being an asshole. And
Yeah.
that's really all it comes down to, is just
Yep.
excusing your shitty behavior. And if we all stopped doing that and took a little more responsibility, which is part of the causality side of it, where we look at the cause, we assign responsibility, and usually if you take a good portion of the responsibility, it actually it empowers you more, because then you realize, like, well, no, you have a choice on whether or not that's going to impact you again in the future.
Yeah.
I feel like by blaming, you're just, yeah, cool. You pointed out it's that person's fault. What's to stop them from doing it again?
Yeah.
Or, kind of thing. So,
Well, and there's something there's a lot of different, psychologists that we work with a few, and then some I listen to on YouTube and different podcasts, but it's like I feel like it's the way you talk to yourself too, and it's something I've done with myself.
yeah.
And I was talking to somebody else the other day about this, and they're like, "Oh, it's just my anxiety." And I'm like, "You got to stop saying that. You can't just keep saying it's just my anxiety. It's because I have this, or it's because I have that." They're like, "Well, I
Yeah.
don't think it's a bad thing." I'm like, "But that's what you're integrating into your subconscious of, like,
Yeah.
this is what you have, and you're gonna always agree with it. Be like, it's not my anxiety. Don't even bring that word up. Don't even use that word. Be like, I'm gonna overcome this. I'm gonna, uh, you know, whatever. I'm going to challenge this thinking, or whatever it is for you, you need to do, because once again, it goes to that blame thing. It's like, it's because I have this. So then I remember I told this to some people, and then it was another conversation I had with somebody, and they were like, well, you're not a doctor, so you shouldn't be saying that stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm not a doctor. I know I'm not. I go, but I've gone through depression. I've gone through anxiety.
Really?
I, I've gone through all these things. I go, so, like, I'm not saying that it's going to work for them. I'm not telling them they have to do this. I'm like, these are just brain hacks I've done for myself, right? Because it's like, anyways. So then I heard this podcast, and this doctor said the same thing, right? Yeah, don't tell yourself you have anxiety. That is one of the worst things you can do. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm like, because I've lived it, I've done it, like, I put the work in on myself, I've tried these things on myself. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and so it's like, I don't know, man. I just, our thoughts, I'm not saying, yeah, so our thoughts are massive, how we talk to ourselves are massive. There's so many studies coming out um uh on, self-talk in our internal dialogue. But going back to your, the emotional thing, I'm not saying have no emotion. I think like you said, emotions, we need to have them, right? Like, that's not what I was saying. It's knowing how to harness the emotion, and it's knowing how to direct it when you need to have it, and also turn it off and turn it back on. And I think with the job, that's very difficult, because we're taught to be emotionless, right? Because we get numb to so many things. So in turn, that comes into our personal life. It can be in friendships. It can be in relationships with, your significant other. It can manifest in many different ways. So that's up to us to see the issue. And if people are saying, man, you're just a little more numb, or just a couple of years ago, you used to, have a little more emotion. What's going on? Pay attention to these things. Pay attention to what people are saying when they see some of these changes, because it's like, I'm not saying you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but pay attention to it and be in tune with your body, and be like, man, maybe I am kind of becoming, more this way or that way. So just be able to harness that. That's what I'm saying. But I definitely feel like in any relationship, if you have no emotion, right, like, that'd just be stupid. So you definitely have to have emotion. We're human. We're not robots. So being able to turn that off and on is very massive. So um, yeah, man, I
No, but
think that's,
it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, I think you're spot on. Giving somebody advice on that, just telling them, like, hey, don't tell yourself, because that's exactly it. Like, I don't tell myself I'm an alcoholic.
yeah,
I don't even participate in that, because it's a negative force that will take hold. And it's like, I still don't, and anybody out there that may be listening to this, I don't want to take away from if the 12 steps help people, but that's one of the things that I just could not resonate with, was the number one thing was, be like, admit that you're powerless against it. And I'm like, okay, I guess if we're gonna argue on a chemical basis, I mean, I just could not wrap my head around that. And there's people that will argue, I mean, to the death that that is the absolute key, is the understanding of that. And I tread very lightly with that. I even saying it on the podcast. I'm sure there's some people that may hear this and very much disagree with me, but I can't help but feel like that overall is a horrible mentality to have, because it's like, no, I just don't see how I'm powerless to anything. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big boy and I make my own decisions, and usually if I do something wrong, then it's my fault because I screwed up and did something wrong, um and it just, I don't know. I don't know if that's a way to say it or not, but it's I think you're spot on. And then I think it's, I laughed when you said that somebody said you weren't a doctor, because it was like a brilliant statement. Like, thanks, I didn't know that I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
Like, and it was just like, well, anybody that's listening to me as if I'm giving them advice as a doctor, maybe they're the one with the fucking problem. They can't differentiate the fact that we're just two
Yeah.
firemen talking. It's like, I don't know. So that kind of stuff is so chicken shit to say.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like the stuff I say on here is because it's like I go back to. So, anyways, the doctor that said this was Mel Robbins. Mel Robbins. It's on a podcast and it's on some of her little
Mm.
clips. And she said it. And she, because she dealt with anxiety and she deals with like some other things. And I really dig her stuff. But she just talks about, it's like, don't tell yourself you have something. You're going to overcome it. Don't even bring that word up into your mind, right? Because now your body's going to believe it. And these are things I tried to do. With everything I was going through. It's like, and I definitely agree with you, Shane. Like, if anybody's going to tell me, oh, you're just powerless, screw that. Like, hell no, dude. Like, that. Yeah, I don't want to get in detail on that one, but it's like, yeah, I'm gonna harness my own power, and I feel like that is the resilience mindset. And I'm not saying, is there sometimes you have to accept and just let things go? Yes, I understand that, but I'm saying, if you feel like your power is being taken out of you because of something, it's like, no, you have the power to make a decision and say, I'm not going to face that at this moment. I'm going to come back to it when whatever it is. But yeah, anyways, dude, yeah, I'm not going to be powerless. Screw that.
No,
Hell no.
it's
Yeah.
funny. This is actually timely that we're even talking about this. I'll share that I had a family member call me who I'm very close to recently. She called me last week, in fact, and she's younger. And obviously, when you're younger, you're searching for your identity and you're looking for some place, a way to connect and explain things. I mean, everything that we're talking about with the causality versus blame. Um, and she informed me that she's bipolar type 2, and she needed to be on these meds and do all this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. And as we talked more and more, um, I can't help but feel like part of it is an identification with other kids in college that are, you know, finding solace in the fact that they're entering the adult world. Things are hard, and they got to find reasons why things are hard. And it's not because things are just hard and that you're not a kid anymore. But it's because they have these ADHD and bipolar and all these other things. Like, let's assign a name to it. Let's assign a.
Yes.
Am I saying that these things aren't real? No. So again, I've said it before on the podcast about, if you are a person that needs to take meds, take your meds. I'm not trying to say that that's bad. I think medicine's amazing. So, science is amazing. But I know this kid. I have a really hard time buying that she's already there. In fact, I had an idea, and I think we'll pitch it. Remind me, I'll tell you about it later. But it's for the podcast, because I think it'd be fascinating to talk about it on the podcast with her and potentially someone else. And then I don't know if it'll work, but I think because it's one of those things where it's like, I get it when you're that age and you're searching for identity, something that feels like, oh yeah, that this explains everything. So often we're looking for an explanation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like, you go back to, we talked about the fires in LA, and 100-mile-an-hour winds. Okay, well, maybe somebody can't wrap their head around the fact that, nope, it's the lack of the water and Newsom's policies and the environmentalists and this, that, and that's all the reasons why the fire. Okay, so then throw that example out. How about tornadoes? How come we don't get, all these political pundits when a tornado rips through Kansas or Kentucky or whatever back there in Tornado Alley and destroys an entire town? How come nobody gets blamed for that? How come then it's just an act of God? You know, so I guess God was pissed off that day and decided to throw a tornado there. Okay, so is that blaming God? Well, are we allowed to blame God? I don't really know the rules. You know, it's like, you know what I mean? It's just like that's the
Yeah.
part that it's like we pick and choose these things to assign blame to, right? Whereas other things we just throw our hands up like, well, it's the Lord's plan or whatever, and we're okay with that. So, and there's a concept of amor fati from Stoicism, which is the love of fate. And, you know, that's kind of one of those things. I think there's times when just like uh shit just happens. You know, it's like if you know, I'm getting ready to leave the house here in the next 20 minutes. Well, let's say I leave in 25 minutes, I get in a car accident. And it's like, well, what if I would have left at 20 minutes like I said? And it's like, was it because God's hand was involved? Was it because I made a bad decision? Was it because, or did it just happen? You know, I mean, it was one of those things. So it's that amor fati kind of concept I try to fall back on, where it's like, dude, there's things that happen that it's a the series of things that happened that led up to it, and you know you could try to overanalyze it and determine a specific cause, but sometimes it's just a NASA did that fascinating study on the normalization of deviance, and that's a great one that we use it all the time in the fire service. But for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's worth looking up on the Googles or YouTube, and
Yeah.
that's called the normalization of deviance because you can look at that and apply it to your life in multiple ways. But anyways, you saying that made me think of that because it 100%. I was trying to have the conversation in a polite way with her about like, no, you need to do some other work before you just like, oh yeah, cool. I'm just gonna take these gnarly meds the rest of my life, and you know,
Yeah, dude. So like you just said something. So like with the Stoic, right? Like once again, I can go back to the Bible and it brought a scripture to my mind. Because what was that term you just said for kind of like fate? What was that term?
amor fati.
Amor
It's
fati.
a
Okay,
Latin, yeah. It's amor being love, and then fati is fate. So it's a love of
got it.
fate.
So like there's a scripture that popped into my head of like unforeseen circumstances befall us all. Things just happen, right? So
Yeah,
it's the same kind of thing, right? But going with what you were saying about your family member, it's one thing that got told to me for a while, and it irritated me, dude. The doctors will just, they want to label you as something, right? They want to put blame to something, right? And in the system we're in, it's easy to blame. I got told this from the beginning. Am I discrediting PTSD, PTSI? Definitely not. I got diagnosed with it. It's a real thing. I had it. I had the diarrhea. I had the nightmares. I couldn't go out in outside for a couple months. I couldn't look at fire engines. I couldn't look. Couldn't be near a fire station for all. I get it. It's real. Okay. But what happens is they want to put me on meds, right? I said no. I don't want to be on meds. Hey, just be on meds for a little bit. I said no. I'm going to battle this. So in my mind, when they diagnosed me with the PTSD, um, it was like, oh, you have PTSD. That's why you're acting like this. You have PTSD. That's why this is happening to you. So in my mind, if I would have had, people can take this the wrong way. I'm not discrediting anything. I've lived it. I've been through it. I'm someone that has had it. It's real. But there was something in my mind that was like, I'm not going to talk to myself like that. I'm not going to tell myself I have PTSD. I'm not going to I let the doctors say their thing, but I'm like, when I go home, no, you're going to overcome this, Eric. You know, I'm not going to be labeled with, oh, since you have this disease or this injury, like I like obviously PTSD because it's an injury, but it's like, I'm not going to let this determine the rest of my life. I'm going to overcome this, right? And there's a lot that can get sucked into, like you're talking about your family member, because the doctors do this, the professionals, right? Here, you're on this medication and you're diagnosed with this. They're putting blame to something, right? I'm not discrediting any of that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that from my personal experience, those same things got told to me from the doctors, from the professionals, right? But in my mind, it kind of goes back to your powerless thing. It's like, no, that's taking power away from me. Hell no. I'm going to keep my power. This is going to be hard as hell. It's going to be difficult. But this is my mind. I'm not going to let somebody else tell me you're going to have this for the rest of your life. Is it something I still battle? Yes, because it's difficult. Things are hard. But it's like, I don't tell myself, oh, I reacted this way because I got PTSD or PTSI, right? Oh, I responded this way because of my past. I'd be putting blame, and rightfully so. Do a lot of people do that? Could I do that? And would people be like, yeah, man, it's because you're PTSD. That's why you're acting like that. Then it would make me feel better, right? But that how my brain works, I don't feel better. I'm like, no, dude, that's a victim mentality. Screw that. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm going to let myself overcome this. And don't even bring that word up. Like, we talk about it, but it's like when dude, it freaking irks me when I'm around
Yeah.
people. Oh, it's my PTSD. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, dude, just stop talking to yourself like that, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not them, right? I'm not the doctor, and people can get mad at me, but I don't freaking care. I've battled it. I get it. A lot of bad stuff has happened to me, bro. A lot. And it's like, you think I got a medical retirement by playing the system? Definitely not. Right? So like but it's one of those things that how we talk to ourselves. I've never wanted to use a diagnosis or something to then victimize myself and blame what has happened to me in life to then just be stagnant. I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's like, find the cause. Okay, cool. Hey, these things happen to you. You got diagnosed with PTSD. Okay, cool. Well, that's what it is, like you said, and let's move forward. Let's find those causes. Let's figure out where it stemmed from. It's going to be a freaking crap show figuring all this out. That's okay, but we're going to figure it out and we're going to move forward. And in that crap show, there's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of emotional things, and that, you know, you're going to lose yourself, you're going to lose your identity, you're going to come back, you're going to, you know, all this stuff. But it's like your intent and your goal is to not be a victim of your circumstance. It's to become better out of your circumstance, out of the past, and use that to grow. So even to this day, do you ever hear me say, yeah, Shane, it's because of my PTSD?
No.
No, right?
No, I don't think either one of
I'm
us
not
ever
gonna
do that.
I'm not gonna ever talk to myself like that,
Yeah.
right? Because
Well, I
I'm
think
like,
that's
that's gonna make me powerless. That's letting that take away my power. I'm like, f that. So like, no, ain't even gonna come. I'll talk about it, but I talk about it like it's outside of me. It's not in me.
but and I think that just kind of like sums up the causation thing. Like that is what caused, the confusion at the end of your career and everything that happened and put you on the path you ended up to get to today. Just like my PTSI or whatever caused me to get in that car drunk that night, even though I didn't understand that and I didn't want to believe that because to me that was an excuse. That was absolutely like, what? That's an easy way out. No, that's just saying,
Yeah,
like, no, my dumbass got drunk. That's what happened. But I was okay with understanding, like, okay, let's again remove the emotion. Is PTSI real? Is PTSD real? Yeah, we know it's real. It's not about saying, like, to your point, anybody that hears this that maybe gets upset because they need the label. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is, it's like you're not talking to yourself that way. The important part is for you to not let that be an excuse, is for you to fall back on. And I hope that's what people hear, because I hear it from what you're saying and I understand and I agree with you because I'm the same way. I don't say that I have PTSD or I say when we talk, I mean, if I'm actually having a conversation with somebody about this, and I say, yeah, I didn't even think that I had anything remotely connected to that stuff because I didn't relate to it in the way they classically teach it to us. I didn't have the nightmares. I didn't sweat. I didn't avoid things. I didn't even care. I didn't give a shit. Like run a call and whatever. But I didn't understand that that was actually a problem. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but then it's so the key is, and you're kind of living proof that you're doing what we're talking about. I'm doing what we're talking about. We've both identified causation in our past. We don't dwell in it. We use it as a tool moving forward to live in the now and to be purpose and driven that way, knowing that we have that understanding of what happened in the past and if we were to not pay attention to that stuff, what could potentially happen again.
yeah,
Something along those lines. But
yeah. That's it, man. Yeah. No, I think it was a good one, man. I think it was really good. You know, yeah. You can reach me at epadgettcoaching@gmail.com.
And I'm at ricfirecaptain@gmail.com. And if you guys can like, subscribe, comment, whatever. I don't even know, but my man Eric says we need it. So, uh, yeah. And feel free to email us or send out if you have questions or comments, concerns, or if you have any suggestions on topics.
Yeah, definitely let us know, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you guys on the next one.